Okay guys, I was wrong. We need to go back to the Windows. So the other day I talked about in part 3 about not having the audit file for Windows 10. That was my mistake. It was actually due to the plugins. I received a corruption, I think. The plugin description database was corrupted. So that's the reason why I didn't see it. So there was something funky wrong with the plugins. So make sure if you need to extend space to make sure it didn't overfill, double check that. So we're going to go back to this just so we can do this now before we go into Linux. I want to make sure you guys are able to run the compliance scan. So let's create a compliance scan. We're going to go back to the policy compliance auditing in the right here. We're going to use this template. Name it whatever you want. Got compliance scan. And then put your targets or whatever your IPs are. Mine is 1.68, my domain controller, and 69. And I like to look at live in case there's mistakes. I like to select these 3 boxes just for additional details. We're going to credential put Windows, put whatever your account is. If you guys don't remember your account, don't forget to check your domain controller. In Active Directory user and computers, for me, I named it Nessus.svc, but don't forget to not confuse the name because this is not the actual account name. If you double click the properties, my account name is actually this, so Nessus.svc. Unless you want to change it right here, I just know that mine is Nessus.svc. So look, so I'm gonna press Nessus.svc. You're gonna type in the password, and then your domain got.ai. Whatever you guys put your domain. So make sure you select these 2 boxes. These are very important for the scan for the especially the compliance. So we're gonna for Windows, we're gonna type in Windows Server 2022, or if you're on 2019 or 2025, just make sure you type that in. And for the purpose of this lab, I'm going to use the DISA STIG because we're going to harden the boxes later and try to get it as high as we can, like 90+%. If you're on CIS, feel free to click one of these. You can, I would recommend maybe doing at least the level 1 profile. If you want to do extra controls, pick the level 2. So I'm going to press DISA STIG here. We're going to leave these default and just save it. We're not going to change the banner. And then what you want to do is press launch. And if you experience any credential issues, which you might, in case like the DC is having issues or something, or some firewall is blocked randomly, make sure you double check the instructions again on how to troubleshoot the Windows credential problem. And the difference here is, especially with the WIMI, you got to make sure the Windows management instrumentation, that service is up. Otherwise, you might get some errors. You can tell right here, almost immediately, my Lord Commander, my domain controller passed, and then here's my server itself that I'm scanning. This member server, Winterfell. So we'll come back to this, and then we'll look at the results to see if both passed, and then we'll look at all the DISA STIG results. And if you guys remember my original DISA STIG SCAP video where we use the SCAP compliance checker, the SEC tool, we're basically doing the same thing but using Tenable Nessus. In the real world, companies, they have probably a huge pile of assets that they need to scan. Ideally, it wouldn't be the best tool to use a SCAP compliance checker unless you're like doing this in an air-gapped environment where you're just doing ones, twosies. But in an organization, when you have thousands of hosts, it's best to use like an enterprise product where you could probably put like an entire subnet range and just let it scan for a couple hours and return with all the results at once to check your compliance, right? On whatever baseline you guys are scanning for or wherever you guys work. So that's what I would recommend. When we return, we'll review the results, we'll report it out, and then we'll fix these findings later. Hey guys, and we're back. The scan looks like it finished. Let's look at the results. So here's the Windows compliance scans. And it looks like one of them succeeded and one of them failed for credentials. So let's take a look at it. Okay, it looks like the DC worked. However, my member server's not working. Why is that? Well, I'm pretty sure we can figure out why. We can check these two plugins again. Remember the 19506? If we look at this one, why does this one fail? The Winterfell. Okay, it says no. So sometimes this is usually a result of like the firewall or some of the protocols blocking it, whether it's like SMB. As you guys remember, as you spend these often online, pay attention to the firewall setting here, because remember we have to make the exception for the SMB and those port 135 and 445, and also we had to do something for remote registry and the WIMI. So you see, notice the firewall, my DC. Usually it's supposed to say domain on. Right now the current profile is private on. So, and then if you look at my member server, you'll notice that the profile is domain on. So you got to pay attention to make sure that they're aligned. So whatever profile you're on, they need to be aligned. Otherwise this is not going to work properly. Because remember, for the firewall, like right now, it's on private on. If we go back to the network and sharing center, if you guys remember what I shared to you about going to this setting right here, event sharing, you notice that right here, because the profile is on current profile, we need this for the Nessus scans. Otherwise this is not going to work. Typically, because it's on a domain, it's working. So you have to get this corrected. But right now, because I'm lazy, I'm going to turn this back on. And I already know that's going to fix the issue right away, because that's the firewall that's blocking it. So you could rerun the scan to fix this, but we're just going to look at the current results as is right now. So right now we know the compliance works for the I guess for the DC, because we see the results here, and you can tell it's the same exact settings, same thing that happened for the SCAP compliance checker, but we're just doing this in this view. So the advantage of using this method, even though you could run a remote SCAP scan with multiple hosts, it's a lot easier to use it on a tool like this to do it. So now we're going to press report to look at the results. So I'm going to press report because I don't want to export this back into my blob. We're just going to use the HTML. And we're going to press this button right here, the compliance. I want to see detailed results. We're going to generate it via HTML. We'll just take a quick look at it. If it opens, okay, there it goes. The file finally opened. Okay, the report finally opened. You guys can just look at this right here. So it scanned both hosts, but remember, this one wasn't fully authenticated, so there might be issues until you get this corrected. But if you look at the report, you can look at it. You see you got the section that says failed. You can select it per host, and when you drill in the report, you can also look at what's passed. Like I'm just going to click one of them so you guys can see. So let's pick a good one. So on the DC, it says right here, must not have fax server installed. So Nessus by default just passed this one. So it determined and scanned, it scans the registry or some of the backend stuff to get this to report back. So this passed by default when Nessus did the scan. You see right there, it scanned the registry. So it didn't exist. So this means this function, the fax role wasn't installed. So later on, if you guys watched my Stig SCAP video before, you could follow that video to kind of harden this. But one thing to note, that was just for a local workstation. When I did the GPOs, to do this the right way, you actually have to set up the sysvol store. We'll do that later. I'll show you guys how to do that. That's more of the Windows admin job, to kind of set up the ADMX templates in the sysvol store for the central store. And that's basically it for the compliance stuff. We'll go back to the Linux stuff a little bit later, but I'll see you guys in the next video. I'm going to update this video for part 3. That's it.